Rip to the nitwit dipshits that whipped into the pits as Esteban Ocon took a trip through these dicks. But enough lip service. Welcome to Race Weekend Update. My name is Stacey Hewen, and let's get right into it. Both Hülkenberg and Ocon spent the entire race waiting for a safety car that never came, so they ended up having to take a trip into the pits right at the end of the race. The strategy was so bad that a group of photographers had gathered at the end of the pit lane, not expecting a car to be coming in for a stop. When asked how he avoided hitting any of the people on the track, Ocon said, "It was actually very easy. They're not my teammate, so I did not want to hit them." Pundits later noted that it was the first time Esteban Ocon had ever done anything that could be comparable to Michael Schumacher. Charles Leclerc had a good weekend, all things considered. When asked how he felt about qualifying on pole, taking second in the sprint, and third in the Grand Prix, he said, "Well, I probably won't be writing a song about this weekend." Charles Leclerc made headlines recently with his song Oz 23, which actually ended up going higher on the charts than he was in the Drivers' Championship last week. The song was a heartbreaking instrumental filled with anguish. Critics are calling it emotional and passionate, while his opponents are calling it showing weakness. Speaking of showing weakness, Lance Stroll made some elementary mistakes which allowed Lewis Hamilton to pass him in an inferior car. To everyone who is surprised that Lewis was able to pass the Aston, let me remind you, this is the difference between a good pay driver and literally the greatest driver of all time according to pretty much every record that exists in the sport. Nyck De Vries disappointed once again, causing a safety car and in turn a poorly timed pit stop on Verstappen's part. This gave Perez the lead, which caused Max to immediately start blaming the engine braking and the diff for the rest of the race. Sergio Perez took yet another victory at a street circuit, making him literally the only person in the world who is happy with the number of street circuits in modern F1. There was a lot of buzz about the modified sprint format this weekend. Most people agreed that it was nice to see the sprint worth more points and also not affecting the starting grid of the Grand Prix. But nobody seems to be able to answer the main question, which is, what is the actual point of a sprint? Following Perez's victory in both the sprint and the Grand Prix this weekend, he managed to close the gap to Verstappen to just 6 points in the Drivers' Championship, yet still nobody believes that he can actually win the Drivers' Championship this season. Off-Circuit F1 released a video recently which stated that it's actually possible for Verstappen to clinch the Drivers' Championship by Zandvoort, which is round 14. After this point, he could actually just hand over his seat to Daniel Ricciardo, who could race the rest of the season, and Red Bull would still end up with a 1-2-3 in the Drivers' Championship in a season where they're only allowed to enter 2 cars. And frankly, if Checo keeps putting on performances like this, he could very well rob us of the possibility of this happening. While we're on the subject of Daniel Ricciardo, this weekend I asked if you think Daniel Ricciardo will ever make it back on the grid, and if so, when and with which team. Of the roughly 4,000 respondents, 25% said 2024, 9% 2025, 4% 2026 or later, and the vast majority, 63% of you said he's never coming back. If we wade into the comments, most of the people who do think he's coming back think it will be with Haas, or maybe even Red Bull. There were some fun suggestions, like B. Tam, who said, Danny Rick won Monaco in 2018, so I think he can go for Indy 500 and Le Mans 24 and try to get the Triple Crown. Only time will tell if B. Tam is huffing hopium or its more insidious brother, copium. But I think we all know the truth. Danny Rick will never be back on the grid again. He's going to end up acting in some mediocre racing movies, putting out a really cringe hit single, and then retiring to life as a pundit with more money in the bank than anyone else on the grid. And for all of you who stuck it out to the end, here's a bonus spicy joke. The teamwork between the Aston drivers this weekend wasn't just unusual for the two of them, it was unusual for F1 drivers in general. Alonso offered brake mallet setup advice to Lance, and Lance offered to not attack Alonso when he knew that they were both just saving their tires. It's already unusual for one driver to suck off the other one during a race, but it's even more unusual for them to 69 over the radio.